The gunshot pierced the night, a stark reminder to Nora Sullivan that she'd overstayed her welcome in Willow Creek. Blood trickled down her arm as she pressed herself against the peeling wallpaper of the Golden Lily Dance Hall's narrow back hallway. The wound merely a graze, but her resolve now ironclad. 3 months in this gilded cage was 3 months too many, and Madame Josephine's promises of protection had proven as hollow as the laughter that echoed from the saloon. It was 1875, and the Wyoming Territory offered little mercy to women with no family and fewer options. At 22, Nora had already weathered more storms than most, but tonight would determine if she'd live to see another sunrise or die trying to claim her freedom. Going somewhere, precious? The voice belonged to Bart Hollister, the dance hall's most persistent and unwelcome patron. His broad frame blocked the dim light from the oil lamps, casting his shadow long and menacing across the floorboards. "Just stepping out for air," Nora replied, her southern accent still lingering despite her best efforts to shed any trace of the life she'd fled. "Funny, considering your belongings are stuffed in that carpet bag behind you." Hollister's eyes, glazed with whiskey and something darker, narrowed. "Josephine won't take kindly to losing her newest attraction, especially not after what you cost her." Nora's fingers brushed against the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. She'd never shot a man before, but tonight seemed as good a time as any to start. "Step aside, Mr. Hollister. I don't belong to anyone." His laugh was cruel. "That's not what the ledger says, girl. You've got debt enough to keep you dancing till your pretty feet bleed." The sound of spurs jingling in the main room provided the distraction Nora needed. As Hollister turned his head toward the noise, she bolted, shoving past him with strength born of desperation. The carpet bag clutched to her chest like a shield. She burst through the back door into the alley, the cold night air slapping her flushed cheeks. The mud sucked at her boots as she ran, her heart hammering against her ribs with each step. Behind her, Hollister's curses mingled with the raucous piano music spilling from the dance hall. Nora had planned to make for the livery, where she'd arranged for a horse her last dollars spent on the promise of escape. But as she rounded the corner, she collided with the solid wall of a man, the impact sending her sprawling into the dirt. "Whoa there," came a deep voice, not unkind but firm. Strong hands steadied her, pulling her upright before she could scramble away. Looking up, Nora found herself staring into eyes the color of a summer storm, set in a face weathered by sun and wind. The man wore a Stetson pulled low, but she could see enough to know he wasn't one of Josephine's regulars. "Please," she gasped, hearing Hollister's heavy footfalls approaching. "He's coming. I can't go back in there." The stranger assessed her quickly, the fear in her eyes, the blood on her sleeve, the desperate grip on her meager possessions, and made a decision that would alter both their lives irrevocably. "Stand behind me," he instructed, positioning himself between Nora and the approaching threat. Hollister emerged from the shadows, pistol drawn. "Hand her over, mister. The lady has obligations to fulfill." The stranger didn't flinch. "Seems to me the lady's made her choice. This ain't your concern. That's Josephine's property you're interfering with." "No woman is property in my book." The stranger's hand hovered near his holster, but he didn't draw. "How much?" Hollister blinked, momentarily confused. "What?" "Her debt. How much to clear it?" A calculating look crossed Hollister's face. $200. Plus interest." "There's no interest," Nora hissed from behind her protector. "He's lying." The stranger nodded slightly, acknowledging her words without taking his eyes off Hollister. "I'll settle with Madame Josephine directly. You can tell her Preston Hayes is coming to talk business." Hollister hesitated, clearly weighing his options against the steady gaze and confident stance of the man before him. Finally, he lowered his gun. "Your funeral, Hayes. Josephine doesn't take kindly to charity cases. As Hollister retreated toward the dance hall, Preston turned to face Nora, taking in her trembling form and defiant chin. "Can you ride?" he asked simply. "Yes, but I don't understand. Why would you help me?" Preston Hayes offered no smile, no reassurance beyond the steady presence of a man accustomed to making swift decisions. "Let's settle your debt first. Then you can decide if you want my help or not." Inside the Golden Lily, Madame Josephine waited behind her ornate desk, a woman whose beauty had hardened into something formidable with age. Her red-painted lips curved into a predatory smile as Preston and Nora entered her office. "Mr. Hayes, an unexpected pleasure. I see you found my wayward bird." Preston placed his hat on the corner of her desk, a deliberate casualness that belied the tension in the room. "Miss Sullivan isn't a bird, Josephine, and she won't be caged any longer." Josephine's eyes narrowed. "Sentiment doesn't settle accounts, Mr. Hayes. The girl owes me." "How much?" Preston's voice was level, businesslike. $250. Josephine's gaze flicked to Nora. The price of room, board, dresses, and my considerable patience with her lack of enthusiasm for the work. "That's a lie." Nora stepped forward, her fingers curled into fists. "I've worked every night, danced with every man you sent my way. I never agreed to anything more, and you know it." Preston raised a hand, silencing the brewing argument. $200 for her complete release. No more, no less. Josephine leaned back in her chair, studying him with cold calculation. "And why would a man like you pay such a sum for a dance hall girl you've only just met? Unless—" Her smile turned knowing. "Ah, I see. Our Nora has been conducting business on the side. Enterprising girl." "Nothing of the sort," Preston replied, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Consider it a business transaction between you and me. The lady is leaving with me tonight, debt-free and reputation intact." A tense silence stretched between them before Josephine shrugged one elegant shoulder. "Your money, your mistake. 200 it is." Preston counted out the bills, a significant sum that represented months of hard work, and placed them on the desk. Josephine made a show of recounting them before sliding a ledger forward, opening it to a page marked with Nora's name. "Sign here, acknowledging full payment," she instructed Preston, then turned to Nora. "And you, my dear, acknowledging that you leave with no further claims or obligations." As Nora signed with shaking hands, Josephine added softly, "The West isn't kind to women without protection, Nora. Remember that when your cowboy here tires of you." Preston's hand settled firmly on Nora's shoulder. "She won't need to remember anything of the sort. Good evening, Josephine." Outside, the night had grown colder, the stars sharp pinpricks in the vast Wyoming sky. Preston led Nora to where a magnificent buckskin stallion stood waiting, its breath forming clouds in the chill air. "Can you ride behind me until we reach the edge of town? My ranch is about 10 miles out. We can discuss your options once we're safely away." Nora clutched her carpet bag tighter, suddenly aware of how vulnerable her position remained. This man had spent a small fortune to free her from Josephine, but men rarely gave without expecting something in return. "Why did you do this, Mr. Hayes? What do you want from me?" Preston met her gaze squarely, no deception in his storm-gray eyes. "Nothing you're not willing to give freely, Miss Sullivan. I've got a housekeeper at my ranch who could use help, and a spare room that's going unused. Beyond that, all I ask is that you tell me your story honestly when you're ready." Something in his straightforward manner eased the tightness in Nora's chest. She'd become adept at reading men during her time at the Golden Lily, and Preston Hayes showed none of the signs of deception she'd come to recognize. "I accept your offer of shelter for tonight," she said carefully. "Beyond that, I make no promises." Preston nodded, accepting her terms without argument. He helped her mount behind him, and as they rode away from Willow Creek, Nora allowed herself to lean against his broad back, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves beneath them like a heartbeat promising something she scarcely dared to name. Possibility. The night embraced them as they rode, the dance hall's gaudy lights fading into the distance. For the first time in months, Nora breathed freely, the weight of captivity lifting with each mile they put between themselves and town. The stranger whose debt she now carried remained silent, allowing her this moment of relief without intrusion. Preston Hayes guided his horse with the easy confidence of a man at home in the saddle. The terrain grew rougher as they left the main trail, winding through stands of pine that whispered secrets in the night breeze. Nora found herself studying the set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, a man accustomed to solitude but not broken by it. "Nearly there," he said after they'd ridden for what felt like hours. "Just beyond that ridge." As they crested the hill, moonlight revealed a sprawling ranch nestled in a protected valley. A sturdy main house stood sentinel over several outbuildings, a corral, and grazing land that stretched toward distant mountains. "This is all yours?" Nora couldn't keep the wonder from her voice. "The Running H," Preston confirmed. "Built it with my own hands over the last 5 years. It's not much compared to the big cattle operations, but it's mine." A light burned in one of the windows, and as they approached, the front door opened to reveal an older woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, a shotgun resting comfortably in her arms. "You're late, Mr. Hayes," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Was about to send the boys looking for you." "No need for concern, Mrs. Whitaker," Preston replied as he reined in his horse. "Had some unexpected business in town." The woman's sharp eyes found Nora, taking in her dance hall finery and carpet bag with a single shrewd glance. Her expression remained neutral, though Nora braced herself for the judgment she'd grown accustomed to. "I see." Mrs. Whitaker lowered the shotgun. "Will your guest be staying the night?" "Miss Sullivan will be staying as long as she chooses," Preston said firmly. "She'll need a hot meal and the guest room prepared." To Nora's surprise, Mrs. Whitaker simply nodded. "Room's already made up. Stew's still warm on the stove. I'll fetch another bowl." As the housekeeper disappeared inside, Preston dismounted and reached up to help Nora down. Her legs felt unsteady after the long ride, and she swayed slightly as her feet touched the ground. "Easy," Preston murmured, his hands lingering at her waist only long enough to ensure she was stable. "You're safe here." The interior of the ranch house was a revelation to Nora. Where she'd expected the Spartan quarters of a bachelor, she found a home furnished with care, solid, well-crafted pieces arranged for comfort rather than show. A fire blazed in the stone hearth, chasing away the night's chill. Mrs. Whitaker emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray laden with 2 steaming bowls of stew, thick slices of bread, and a pot of coffee. She set it on the dining table without ceremony. "Eat while it's hot," she instructed. "I've put fresh linens in the guest room and laid out a nightgown that should fit well enough for tonight." She paused, giving Nora another assessing look. "We're about the same height, though I've got a few more years and a few more pounds on me." Nora found herself warming to the woman's direct manner. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker. You're very kind." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," the housekeeper replied, though her eyes softened slightly. "Common decency isn't kindness, it's just what's right. Now eat and rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." After Mrs. Whitaker had retired to her own quarters in a separate wing of the house, Nora and Preston ate in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable. The stew was hearty and flavorful, unlike the thin fare served at the dance hall, and Nora found herself devouring it with undignified haste. "There's plenty more," Preston observed, refilling her bowl without comment. As she ate her second helping more slowly, Nora studied her benefactor in the firelight. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting against harsh sun rather than age. His dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and his hands, though work roughened, moved with a deliberate gentleness. "Why did you really help me tonight, Mr. Hayes?" The question had been burning in her mind since they'd left Willow Creek. Preston set down his coffee cup, considering his words carefully. 6 years ago, my sister found herself in a situation not unlike yours. Different circumstances, same predicament, trapped, with no good options and no one willing to help. He met Nora's gaze steadily. She didn't survive it. The simple statement landed like a stone in Nora's chest. "I'm sorry. So am I. Every day." Preston's expression remained composed, but grief shadowed his eyes. "When I saw you running tonight, I saw Catherine. I couldn't walk away." "What happened to her?" Nora asked softly. "Her husband was a violent man. She tried to leave. He found her." Preston's jaw tightened. "By the time I tracked them down, it was too late." "And her husband?" Something cold and final flashed across Preston's face. "He won't hurt anyone else." The implication hung in the air between them. Nora should have been frightened by this glimpse of the darkness he carried, but instead, she found herself nodding in understanding. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. "You deserved the truth." Preston rose from the table. "I'll show you to your room. You must be exhausted." The guest room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a washstand with a pitcher of hot water, and a window that would catch the morning sun. The promised nightgown lay folded at the foot of the bed. "The door has a lock," Preston pointed out. "Use it if it makes you feel safer. Mrs. Whitaker sleeps just down the hall if you need anything during the night." As he turned to leave, Nora found herself reluctant to see him go. This strange man who had upended her life so completely in the span of a few hours. "Mr. Hayes," she called after him. When he paused at the threshold, she continued, "You've given me your name and your story, but you haven't asked for mine." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Your story is yours to share when you're ready, Miss Sullivan. Not before." After he'd gone, Nora stood in the center of the room, overwhelmed by the sudden quiet and the weight of her unexpected freedom. She unpinned her hair, letting the auburn waves fall around her shoulders, and washed the dance hall paint from her face with hands that shook with fatigue. As she changed into the borrowed nightgown, her fingers brushed against the small wound on her arm, a reminder of how close she'd come to a very different fate. The events of the night crashed over her then, and she sank onto the bed, silent tears streaming down her face until exhaustion finally claimed her. Nora woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the distant sounds of a ranch coming to life. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was, the absence of perfumed air and piano music jarring after months at the Golden Lily. Reality returned in a rush. The escape, the stranger's intervention, the long ride to this hidden valley. She rose quickly, unwilling to abuse Preston Hayes' hospitality by lingering abed. The borrowed nightgown was modest but thin, and she turned to her carpet bag, retrieving her one decent dress, a blue cotton that had seen better days but wasn't cut to display her charms like her dance hall costumes. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Miss Sullivan?" Mrs. Whitaker's voice carried through the wood. "There's hot water for washing and breakfast is on the table whenever you're ready." "Thank you," Nora called back. "I'll be down shortly." When she emerged from her room, the smell of coffee and frying bacon guided her to the kitchen, where she found Mrs. Whitaker bustling between the stove and table. The housekeeper looked up, assessing Nora with a sharp eye. "Good morning. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Nora admitted. "Sit." Mrs. Whitaker instructed, setting a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before her. Mr. Hayes has been up since dawn, seeing to the horses. He'll be in shortly. Nora hesitated, then ventured, Mrs. Whitaker, may I ask you something? The older woman raised an eyebrow. You may ask. Whether I answer depends on the question. Is Mr. Hayes? Nora searched for the right words. Is he the kind of man who keeps his word? Mrs. Whitaker's stern features softened slightly. Preston Hayes is the most honorable man I've ever known. If he told you you're free to go or stay as you choose, then that's exactly what he meant. Relief washed through Nora. Thank you. Don't thank me for the truth. Mrs. Whitaker poured coffee into a mug and placed it beside Nora's plate. Now, what can you do? The abrupt question caught Nora off guard. I beg your pardon? What skills do you have? Can you cook? So? Keep accounts. Mrs. Whitaker's practical tone held no judgment, only curiosity. I can do all of those things, Nora replied, a touch of pride entering her voice. Before the dance hall, I was a teacher's assistant at a school in Denver. Educated, then. Good. Mrs. Whitaker nodded approvingly. This place could use a woman's touch beyond what my old hands can provide. And Mr. Hayes's ledgers are in a shameful state. Before Nora could respond, the back door opened, and Preston entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He'd clearly been working hard already, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. He stopped short at the sight of Nora at his table. Good morning, he said, removing his hat. I trust you slept well? Very well, thank you. Nora found herself suddenly self-conscious, aware of how domestic the scene must appear, as though she belonged here, in this man's kitchen, sharing his breakfast. Mrs. Whitaker broke the moment by thrusting a mug of coffee into Preston's hands. Wash up before you sit. I won't have barn dirt at my clean table. As Preston obediently moved to the wash basin, Nora caught the hint of a smile playing at his lips. This was a routine. She realized the gruff housekeeper and the ranch owner. A comfortable dance they'd performed countless times before. Over breakfast, Preston outlined the workings of the running H. I've got 4 hands who help with the cattle and horses. They bunk in the outbuilding near the corral. Mrs. Whitaker keeps the house and gardens. It's a small operation compared to some, but it's growing. It's impressive, Nora said sincerely, to build all this in just 5 years. Preston shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Had a good start. My father left me some capital when he passed. The rest has been hard work and some luck with breeding stock. Mr. Hayes breeds horses, Mrs. Whitaker explained. Has a way with them that borders on uncanny. His stallions fetch top price in Denver. A flash of pride crossed Preston's face before he steered the conversation elsewhere. Miss Sullivan, I meant what I said last night. You're welcome to stay here as long as you like, whether that's a day or longer. Nora set down her coffee cup, meeting his gaze directly. I'd like to stay at least for a while. I have nowhere else to go and She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. I owe you a debt I can't repay in money, but I can work. I can help Mrs. Whitaker, keep your accounts in order, make myself useful until I decide what comes next. You owe me nothing, Preston said firmly. The debt to Josephine is settled and forgotten. Not by me, Nora countered. I pay my debts, Mr. Hayes, one way or another. A look of respect crossed his features. Very well, but understand that you're not a servant here. You're a guest who's choosing to contribute, and she'll have proper wages, Mrs. Whitaker added unexpectedly, put aside for when she decides her next step. I've been telling you for months I need help, Mr. Hayes. It seems Providence has provided it. Preston conceded with a nod. As you say, Mrs. Whitaker. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got horses waiting. After he'd gone, Nora turned to the housekeeper. He's not what I expected. Mrs. Whitaker's shrewd eyes assessed her. Few men are, for good or ill. Preston Hayes has known his share of darkness, but he hasn't let it claim him. She stood, gathering the breakfast dishes. Now, if you're to work here, let me show you around the house. We'll need to see about getting you some proper clothes, too. Can't have you working in that Sunday dress. The next few days established a rhythm that Nora found both unfamiliar and deeply comforting. She rose with the sun, helped Mrs. Whitaker prepare breakfast for the household, then turned her attention to whatever tasks needed doing mending, cleaning, or organizing Preston's chaotic office. On her third afternoon at the Running H, Nora sat at the desk in Preston's study, frowning over his ledgers. The ranch was doing better than he'd let on, much better, but his method of accounting was haphazard at best. "This makes no sense," she muttered, comparing two entries that contradicted each other. "Talking to yourself is the first sign of ranch fever," came Preston's voice from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, hat in hand, looking more relaxed than she'd yet seen him. Nora didn't look up from the ledger. "Then I've caught it from you, Mr. Hayes. Your bookkeeping would make a banker weep." A chuckle escaped him the first time she'd heard him laugh. The sound was warm and unexpectedly pleasant. "Numbers were never my strong suit," he admitted, crossing to stand behind her chair. "What's the damage? Am I headed for ruin?" "Quite the opposite." Nora pointed to her calculations. "You're turning a significant profit, especially with your breeding program. But you'd never know it from these records." Preston leaned closer to see where she was pointing, his presence warm at her back. "That can't be right." "I've been reinvesting everything back into the ranch." "Yes, but the value of your stock has increased dramatically." Nora turned slightly, suddenly aware of his proximity. "You're becoming a wealthy man, Mr. Hayes, whether you intended to or not." Something vulnerable flashed in his eyes before he stepped back, restoring a proper distance between them. Wealth wasn't the goal, just a good life, honest work. "You've achieved that and more." Nora closed the ledger, sensing his discomfort with the topic. "I can set up a proper bookkeeping system for you if you'd like. Make it easier to track everything." Preston nodded, seemingly grateful for the shift in conversation. "I'd appreciate that. Mrs. Whitaker tells me you were a teacher's assistant before. Where did you learn accounting?" The question was asked casually, but Nora tensed. They had reached the moment she'd been dreading, the inevitable questions about her past. "My father was a banker," she said finally. "He insisted I understand finances, even though he never intended me to use the knowledge professionally. A woman should know the value of money, he used to say, even if she never earns it herself." "Your father sounds like a practical man." "He was." Nora's voice softened with memory. "He died 3 years ago. Influenza. My mother followed 6 months later. Some said it was grief, but I think she just lost the will to fight when the illness came for her too." Preston's expression was compassionate but not pitying. "I'm sorry. Losing family leaves wounds that never quite heal." "No, they don't." Nora straightened the papers on the desk, needing something to do with her hands. "After they died, I took the teaching position in Denver. I thought I'd found my path. But then the school closed when funding was cut. I had no family to return to, no prospects." She hesitated, then continued, determined to tell the whole truth. "I answered an advertisement for a position as a companion to an elderly lady traveling west. It seemed respectable enough." Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. "But there was no elderly lady." "No. When I arrived in Cheyenne, I discovered the position was quite different from what had been described. The man who'd placed the ad sold me to Josephine to cover his gambling debts. Shame burned in her cheeks despite her resolve. I fought, but in the end I had no choice. It was the dance hall or the street. And did Josephine force you to? Preston left the question unfinished, his jaw tight. No. Nora met his gaze steadily. Dancing and flirting were required. Beyond that was optional for those who chose it. Some did. I didn't. Relief visibly washed over his features, followed quickly by something like anger. Josephine led me to believe otherwise. Of course she did, Nora replied bitterly. She wanted you to think you were rescuing me from far worse. It made her price seem reasonable. Preston ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. I'd have paid it regardless. The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Nora looked down at her hands, suddenly overwhelmed by the strange turn her life had taken. Why did you try to run that night? Preston asked softly. What changed? One of the patrons became insistent. He couldn't accept that my smiles and dances weren't genuine interest. Nora's hand unconsciously moved to the healing graze on her arm. When I rejected him clearly, he pulled a gun. Said if he couldn't have me, he'd make sure no one else would want me. Preston's expression darkened dangerously. Who was he? It doesn't matter now. I'm here and he's there. Nora managed a small smile. Thanks to you. It matters to me. His voice was quiet but laden with intent. Nora recognized the protective anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. His name was Maxwell Drake. A gambler passing through. Likely gone by now. Preston nodded once, filing the information away. She had no doubt he'd remember it. Thank you for telling me your story, he said after a moment. It can't have been easy. It's a relief, actually, to speak the truth and not be judged for it. Nora hesitated, then added, I've been afraid you might think less of me, knowing where you found me. Preston's expression softened. Nora, I've watched you these past days. I've seen your kindness to Mrs. Whitaker, your intelligence with the books, your determination to make a place for yourself here. Where I found you tells me nothing about who you are, only the circumstances that trapped you. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. Thank you, Preston. A moment of connection stretched between them, fragile and promising. Then Mrs. Whitaker's voice called from the kitchen, announcing dinner was ready, and the spell was broken. As they moved toward the dining room, Preston paused. Nora, there's a social at the town church this Saturday. Would you consider attending with me? It might be good for you to meet some of the local families. The invitation, so normal and yet so significant, took her by surprise. I'd like that very much. His answering smile transformed his serious face, revealing a dimple in one cheek she hadn't noticed before. Good. That's good. The days leading up to the social passed in a flurry of activity. Mrs. Whitaker declared that Nora couldn't possibly wear any of her current dresses to meet the townsfolk, and set about altering one of her own better gowns, a rich burgundy wool that complemented Nora's auburn hair. You've got the figure for it, the housekeeper declared as she pinned the waist. Just needs taking in here and there. When we get to town, we'll see about ordering you some proper clothes of your own. Nora protested the expense, but Mrs. Whitaker waved her objections away. Consider it an advance on your wages. Besides, Mr. Hayes instructed me to make sure you had whatever you needed. On Saturday morning, Nora woke with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The prospect of meeting new people, respectable people who knew nothing of her past, filled her with hope. But beneath that hope lurked fear. What if someone from Willow Creek recognized her? What if her brief time at the dance hall followed her here, tainting this fresh start? Mrs. Whitaker seemed to sense her anxiety as she helped Nora dress for the social. "The folks in Pinecrest are good people by and large," she said, deftly arranging Nora's hair into a becoming style. "Not without their flaws and gossip, mind you, but decent." "And how will they view me?" Nora asked quietly. "A strange woman appearing suddenly at the running H?" Mrs. Whitaker's hands stilled. "They'll see what Mr. Hayes tells them to see his late sister's friend. Come to help around the ranch and recover from personal loss." Surprise flitted across Nora's face. "He's thought of a story for me?" "It's not a story so much as a carefully selected truth. You are recovering from loss. You are helping at the ranch. And while you never met his sister, I suspect Catherine would have counted you a friend." The older woman secured a final pin in Nora's hair. "The rest is no one's business but yours." When Nora descended the stairs, Preston waited in the foyer, dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and a crisp white shirt that made his tanned skin appear even more so by contrast. He held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously until he caught sight of her. The admiration that blazed in his eyes as he looked at her sent heat rushing to Nora's cheeks. No man had ever looked at her quite that way before, as though she were something precious and rare, not merely desirable. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." Mrs. Whitaker worked miracles with the dress. Nora smoothed her hands over the rich fabric. "Are you sure about this? About taking me into town?" Preston offered his arm. "More certain than I've been about anything in a long while." The drive to Pinecrest took nearly an hour, time filled with companionable conversation about the ranch, the town they were approaching, and the people Nora would meet. Preston's buggy was well-sprung and comfortable, pulled by a matching pair of the bay geldings he'd bred himself. "The town's small," he explained as they crested a hill that revealed Pinecrest nestled in the valley below, "but growing steadily since the railroad spur came through last year. We've got a general store, hotel, church, school, and doctor now. Even talk of a proper bank opening next spring." Nora took in the neat wooden buildings with their fresh paint, the church steeple rising above the other rooftops, the bustling main street. After months at the Golden Lily, with its garish facade and shadowy interior, the honest sunlit simplicity of Pinecrest seemed almost too good to be true. "It's lovely," she said softly. As they drove down the main street, heads turned to follow their progress. Preston nodded greeting to several people, occasionally raising a hand in silent acknowledgement. "Everyone's staring," Nora murmured, fighting the urge to shrink back against the seat. "They're curious. I don't often come to town events, and never with a companion." Preston's voice held a thread of amusement. "By sunset, there'll be at least 3 different theories about who you are and why you're with me. And that doesn't bother you? People will talk regardless of what we do. Better to give them something worthwhile to discuss." He guided the horses toward the church, where other buggies and wagons already gathered. "Besides, you've nothing to hide or be ashamed of." The church hall was decorated with wildflowers and ribbon streamers, tables laden with food lining one wall, while a small group of musicians tuned their instruments in the corner. Women in their best dresses clustered in conversation while men gathered near the punch bowl, their laughter occasionally rising above the general din. As Preston helped Nora from the buggy, a tall, silver-haired man approached them, his face creasing in a welcoming smile. "Preston Hayes. Thought my eyes were deceiving me when I saw you driving up." The man clapped Preston on the shoulder before turning curious eyes to Nora. "Reverend Miller, may I present Miss Nora Sullivan?" Preston said formally. "Miss Sullivan, Reverend Thomas Miller." "A pleasure, Miss Sullivan." The Reverend's handshake was warm and genuine. "We don't often see Preston at our social gatherings. You must be quite persuasive." Nora smiled, relaxing slightly under the man's kind gaze. Perhaps Mr. Hayes simply needed a worthy excuse to attend. Reverend Miller laughed. Well put. Please, come in and enjoy yourselves. Martha has been asking after you, Preston. She'll be delighted you've come. Inside, Preston guided Nora through introductions with a protective hand at the small of her back. She met the doctor and his wife, the schoolteacher, the general store owner, and countless others whose names blurred together. Each greeted her with varying degrees of curiosity and warmth. Miss Sullivan is staying at the Running H, Preston explained repeatedly. She was a friend of my sister's, visiting from Denver. The simple explanation seemed to satisfy most, though Nora noticed a few speculative glances exchanged between some of the women. Only one Martha Miller, the Reverend's wife, seemed to look past the story to the truth beneath. However you came to be here, the older woman said quietly when they had a moment alone. I'm glad to see the change you've brought to Preston. He carries too much alone. Before Nora could respond, the musicians struck up a lively tune, and couples began moving to the cleared center of the room for dancing. Preston appeared at her side. Would you care to dance, Miss Sullivan? The request sent an unexpected pang through Nora's heart. Dancing had been her job at the Golden Lily, performed with painted smiles for men who saw her as merchandise. But here, in this sunlit hall with Preston looking at her with such gentle inquiry, dancing suddenly seemed like the most natural thing in the world. I'd be delighted, Mr. Hayes. His hand at her waist was respectful, maintaining a proper distance between them as they moved into the pattern of the dance. Nora found herself relaxing into the music, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement without expectation or demand. You dance very well, she observed as Preston guided her through a turn. My mother insisted on lessons, he replied, a hint of self-deprecation in his smile. Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a bull in a china shop. She taught you well. As the evening progressed, Nora danced not only with Preston but with several other men, the doctor, the Reverend, and a few of the local ranchers. Each treated her with courteous respect, and gradually, she felt the knot of tension in her chest loosen. During a break in the dancing, Preston brought her a cup of punch and guided her to a quiet corner. How are you finding Pinecrest? It's wonderful, Nora answered honestly. Everyone has been so kind. Most are. There are always exceptions. His gaze flicked briefly to a tight-knit group of women who occasionally cast disapproving glances their way. Mrs. Hargrove and her friends consider themselves the moral authorities of the town. They disapprove of most things on principle. Including me? Including any woman in my company, Preston corrected. They've been trying to marry me off to suitable candidates for years. The thought of Preston being pursued by matchmaking matrons brought an unexpected smile to Nora's lips. And have none of these candidates appealed to you? Something shifted in his expression, a seriousness replacing his light tone. I wasn't looking. Before Nora could decipher his meaning, a commotion at the entrance drew their attention. A man stood in the doorway, swaying slightly, his appearance disheveled enough to suggest he'd been drinking. That's Edward Thompson, Preston said quietly, his posture tensing. Owns the adjacent property to mine. We've had disagreements. Thompson scanned the room until his gaze landed on Preston and Nora. A slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face as he made his way toward them. Hayes, he drawled, coming to a stop before them. Didn't expect to see you here. You usually avoid civilized gatherings. Thompson. Preston's acknowledgement was curt, his hand coming to rest protectively near Nora's elbow. Thompson's bloodshot eyes fixed on Nora, giving her a slow, assessing look that made her skin crawl. And who's this lovely creature? Don't believe we've been introduced. Miss Sullivan, Preston said, not offering further explanation. If you'll excuse us, now, don't be hasty. Thompson stepped into their path. Miss Sullivan and I haven't had the pleasure of a dance yet. Perhaps another time, Nora replied coolly. I was just about to step outside for some air. Thompson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Interesting accent you've got there. Southern, isn't it? Reminds me of a girl I met recently in a dance hall over in Willow Creek. Pretty little thing, though not as pretty as you. Ice formed in Nora's veins. It wasn't possible. Thompson couldn't have seen her at the Golden Lily. She'd have remembered him. Preston's voice cut through her panic, hard as steel. You're drunk, Thompson. Go home before you embarrass yourself further. Just making conversation, Thompson replied with feigned innocence. Curious how a man like you suddenly has a fine lady staying at his ranch. People might wonder where she came from, what her story might be. Preston took a step forward, his height allowing him to look down at Thompson with barely contained anger. Her story is none of your concern. Neither is my business. I won't tell you again to move along. For a tense moment it seemed Thompson might push further. Then Reverend Miller appeared at their side, his presence defusing the situation. Edward, I believe your sister was looking for you, the Reverend said firmly. She mentioned something about driving you home. Thompson hesitated, then stepped back with a mocking bow. Another time, then. Miss Sullivan, a pleasure. I'm sure we'll meet again. As he walked away, Nora released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Preston's hand at her elbow steadied her. I'm sorry, he murmured. Thompson has always been troublesome, but that was beyond the pale. He couldn't have seen me at the Golden Lily, Nora whispered, keeping her voice low enough that only Preston could hear. I'd remember him. It was a lucky guess meant to provoke. Nothing more. Preston's reassurance was confident, but Nora saw concern lingering in his eyes. Would you like to leave? Nora straightened her shoulders, refusing to let Thompson's insinuations drive her away. No, I won't give him the satisfaction. A smile of approval crossed Preston's face. Then let's dance. For the remainder of the evening, Nora pushed Thompson's comments from her mind, focusing instead on the warmth of Preston's hand against hers, the genuine welcome from most of the townsfolk, and the simple joy of being treated as a respectable woman again. As they drove back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, a comfortable silence settled between them. Nora found herself stealing glances at Preston's profile, struck by how quickly he'd become a fixed point in her shifting world. Thank you for tonight, she said finally. For everything. Preston kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was soft when he replied, You don't need to thank me for treating you as you deserve to be treated, Nora. But I do, she insisted. You've given me more than shelter or protection. You've given me a chance to remember who I am beyond what happened at the Golden Lily. He turned to look at her then, the moonlight casting his features in silver and shadow. And who are you, Nora Sullivan? The question, simple yet profound, caught her off guard. Who was she now? Not the sheltered banker's daughter, nor the desperate dance hall girl. Someone new, perhaps someone still forming in the space between past and future. I'm not entirely sure yet, she admitted, but I think I'd like to find out. Here, if that's still agreeable to you. Preston's smile was slow and warm, reaching his eyes in a way that made her heart beat faster. Nothing would please me more. As the running H came into view, its windows glowing with welcoming lamplight, Nora felt something settle within her, not quite peace, not quite certainty, but the beginnings of both. For the first time in longer than she could remember, tomorrow held promise instead of dread. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to the running H. Nora was in the kitchen with Mrs. Whitaker, learning the housekeeper's secret recipe for sourdough bread, when the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. We're not expecting anyone today, are we? Nora asked, wiping flour from her hands. Mrs. Whitaker moved to the window, her expression darkening as she peered out. "It's Thompson, and he's not alone." Preston had ridden out at dawn to check on a pregnant mare in the north pasture. The ranch hands were scattered across the property, tending to various tasks. For the moment, the women were alone. "Should we bar the door?" Nora asked, anxiety rising in her throat. "No." Mrs. Whitaker's voice was firm as she reached for her shotgun, which stood ever ready in the corner. "This is Mr. Hayes's house, and we don't cower from the likes of Edward Thompson. But we don't take foolish chances either." As hoofbeats approached the front yard, Mrs. Whitaker positioned herself in the doorway, shotgun held at a casual but ready angle. Nora stood slightly behind her, heart pounding. Thompson dismounted first, followed by two men Nora didn't recognize. All three wore expressions that suggested this wasn't a social call. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitaker," Thompson called, his tone falsely pleasant. "Is Hayes around?" "Mr. Hayes is tending to his stock," the housekeeper replied coolly. "He's not receiving visitors today." Thompson's smile didn't falter. "That's a shame. I was hoping to continue our conversation from last night." His gaze shifted to Nora. "Perhaps Miss Sullivan would be willing to entertain us while we wait?" "Miss Sullivan is occupied with household duties." Mrs. Whitaker raised the shotgun slightly. "State your business, Mr. Thompson, or be on your way." "My business is with Hayes, but it concerns the lady." Thompson took a step forward, stopping only when Mrs. Whitaker's finger moved visibly to the trigger. "I've been to Willow Creek this morning. Interesting place. Had a most illuminating conversation with a Madame Josephine at an establishment called the Golden Lily." Ice formed in Nora's veins. It hadn't been a lucky guess after all. Somehow Thompson knew. "Whatever you think you know," she began. But Thompson cut her off. "I know Hayes paid good money to buy you out of a dance hall. I know you were entertaining men for profit. I know you're not his sister's friend or any kind of respectable woman." His smile turned cruel. "What I don't know is what the good people of Pinecrest would think of this arrangement. Or what the ladies of the church auxiliary would say about a soiled dove living under Hayes's roof, pretending to be something she's not." "That's enough." The deep voice came from behind Thompson. Preston had approached from the barn without any of them noticing, his expression cold and dangerous. "You're trespassing, Thompson. Leave now." Thompson turned, unsurprised. "Hayes, thought you might be lurking nearby. We were just having a friendly chat about Miss Sullivan's previous occupation." Preston's hand rested near his holstered pistol. "There's nothing friendly about your visit or your intentions. Whatever grievance you think you have with me, leave Miss Sullivan out of it." "But she's the most interesting part," Thompson countered. "A man's choice in companionship says so much about his character. What does it say about yours that you'd bring a whore into your home and parade her around town as respectable?" The word hung in the air like poison. Nora flinched as though struck, shame and anger warring within her. Preston's voice, when he spoke, was deadly quiet. "I won't warn you again. Get on your horse and ride out, or I'll put you down where you stand." One of Thompson's companions shifted nervously. "Ed, maybe we should go. This ain't worth bloodshed." Thompson hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he shrugged. "Another time, then. But word travels fast in these parts, Hayes. By sundown, everyone will know what kind of woman you're harboring." As Thompson and his men mounted and rode away, Nora's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Mrs. Whitaker's steadying hand at her elbow guided her to a chair. Preston entered the kitchen, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Are you both all right?" "We're fine," Mrs. Whitaker answered for them both. "Though I was close to putting buckshot in that snake's backside." "How did he know?" Nora whispered, looking up at Preston with devastation in her eyes. How could he possibly have known about the golden lily? Preston knelt before her chair, taking her trembling hands in his. Thompson's been looking for ways to undermine me for years. We've had water rights disputes, boundary disagreements. When he saw you with me at the social, he must have decided to investigate. But Willow Creek is nearly 50 miles from here, Mrs. Whitaker pointed out. Distance wouldn't deter him if he thought he could gain an advantage. Preston's jaw tightened. He must have ridden out at first light to make it there and back by now. Nora pulled her hands away, rising from the chair. He's going to tell everyone. Everything I feared will come true. They'll all look at me and see only what I was forced to be, not who I am. Nora, no. She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. You've been nothing but kind, but this was always too good to be true. I can't stay here now. I'll only bring scandal to your door. Preston straightened, his expression resolute. I don't give a damn about scandal. You should, Nora countered, her voice rising. You have a business, a reputation. Thompson is right. What will your neighbors think? The women from the church. How can you sell horses to men who believe you're living in sin with a dance hall girl? Let me worry about that. Preston moved toward her, stopping when she backed away further. Nora, please, don't let Thompson drive you away. That's exactly what he wants. Mrs. Whitaker cleared her throat. Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss this privately. She set the shotgun aside and moved toward the door, pausing only to add, for what it's worth, Miss Sullivan, decent folks care more about who you are now than who you were obliged to be before. And Mr. Hayes has earned enough respect in this community to weather whatever storm Thompson stirs up. After the housekeeper had gone, a heavy silence fell between Nora and Preston. Outside, the normal sounds of ranch life continued: horses nickering, men calling to each other, the distant lowing of cattle. Inside, two people stood at a crossroads neither had anticipated reaching so soon. I should pack my things, Nora said finally, her voice small. And go where? Preston asked quietly. I don't know. Somewhere no one knows me. I have a little money saved from my wages here. It's enough to get me started somewhere new. Preston ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. Running won't solve anything, Nora. Believe me, I tried that after Catherine died. You just carry the past with you wherever you go. What choice do I have? Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. Stay here and watch as everyone looks at me with contempt? Bring shame to you and Mrs. Whitaker. You have the choice to stand your ground, to show Thompson and anyone else who might judge you that you're not defined by circumstances beyond your control. Preston took a careful step toward her. And you wouldn't be facing it alone. Something in his voice, a note of vulnerability beneath the strength, made Nora look at him properly. What she saw in his eyes stole her breath. Determination? Yes, but also something deeper. Something that mirrored the feelings she'd been trying to deny within herself. Why would you risk so much for me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You barely know me. Preston's smile was sad but genuine. I know enough. I know you're brave and resilient. I know you're intelligent and kind. I know that in the weeks you've been here, this house has felt more like a home than it has since I built it. He paused, then added softly, and I know that the thought of you leaving ties my gut in knots. The simple honesty of his words cracked something open in Nora's chest. I'm afraid, she admitted, not just of what people will say, but of what I'm beginning to feel for you. Hope bloomed in Preston's expression. What are you feeling, Nora? Things I shouldn't. Things that complicate an already impossible situation. She shook her head. I owe you so much already. I can't ask you to defend me against the entire town as well. You're not asking. I'm offering. Preston closed the distance between them, reaching out to touch her cheek with gentle fingers. "Let me stand with you, Nora. Together we can face whatever comes." The warmth of his touch sent a tremor through her. It would be so easy to lean into that strength, to believe that they could overcome the scandal Thompson was surely spreading even now. But experience had taught Nora that hope was a dangerous thing. "I need time," she said finally, stepping back from his touch. "Time to think, to decide what's best." Disappointment flickered in Preston's eyes, but he nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." "But Nora?" He waited until she met his gaze. "Whatever you decide, know that my door, my home, will always be open to you." As Nora retreated to her room, confusion and conflict battled within her. The logical choice was to leave before Thompson's poison spread further. Yet something stronger than logic kept her from immediately packing her bags, something that felt dangerously like belonging. She moved to the window, gazing out at the ranch that had become a sanctuary. Preston had returned to work, visible now in the corral with one of the yearling colts, his movements patient and sure as he guided the young horse through its paces. Watching him, Nora realized with startling clarity that leaving the running H would hurt far more than facing the town's judgment. Somewhere in the past weeks, this place, these people had become precious to her in a way she'd never anticipated. The question was whether she had the courage to stay and fight for this fragile happiness, or if fear would drive her away from the first real chance at love she'd ever known. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the yard, a rider approached the ranch at a gallop. Nora, who had spent the afternoon in restless contemplation, moved to the window at the sound of hoofbeats. "It's Reverend Miller," she called to Mrs. Whitaker, recognizing the silver-haired man even at a distance. The housekeeper frowned. "He rarely visits unless there's trouble." Preston emerged from the barn to greet the Reverend, the two men speaking in low, urgent tones that didn't carry to the house. After several minutes, both men turned toward the main house, their expressions grave. Nora's heart sank. Thompson had wasted no time, it seemed. When Preston led Reverend Miller into the parlor, Nora stood to receive them, her hands clasped tightly before her to hide their trembling. "Miss Sullivan," the Reverend greeted her with the same kindness he'd shown at the social. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I felt it important to speak with you directly." "You've heard, then," Nora said quietly, "about my past." Reverend Miller nodded. "Edward Thompson has been most vocal about his discoveries today." "Whatever he told you is not my concern," the Reverend interrupted gently. "Your past is between you and God, my dear. My concern is for your present well-being and for the peace of this community." Preston moved to stand beside Nora, his silent support bolstering her courage. "What exactly has Thompson been saying, Reverend?" "That Miss Sullivan was employed at a dance hall in Willow Creek. That you, Preston, paid a substantial sum to remove her from that establishment. And that the two of you are now living in a manner he deems inappropriate." The Reverend's distaste for relaying such gossip was evident. "He's stirring considerable talk in town." "It's not what he implies," Nora said, heat rising in her cheeks. "Mr. Hayes provided me with shelter and employment, nothing more. Mrs. Whitaker has been present as chaperone at all times." "I never doubted it," Reverend Miller assured her. "I know Preston's character too well to believe Thompson's insinuations." Relief washed through Nora. "Thank you for that, at least. But others may not be so discerning," the Reverend continued. "Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. Thompson is calling for Miss Sullivan to be unwelcome in Pinecrest. He's persuaded several influential citizens that her presence would set a poor example." Preston's expression hardened. "That's absurd. Nora has done nothing wrong." "I agree. but perception often matters more than truth in small communities. Reverend Miller turned to Nora with compassion in his eyes. My dear, I want you to know that my home and my church remain open to you, regardless of your past circumstances. As do the homes of several other good families who recognize the difference between choices freely made and situations forced upon us. Tears pricked at Nora's eyes. You're very kind, Reverend. Kindness has nothing to do with it, he replied, echoing Mrs. Whitaker's earlier sentiment. It's simple Christian duty to defend the vulnerable and oppose injustice. What can be done about Thompson? Preston asked, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of anger. That's actually the other reason for my visit. Thompson was not discreet in his accusations this afternoon. Among those he approached was Sheriff Davis. Preston tensed. And Sheriff Davis reminded Thompson that spreading malicious gossip with intent to damage reputations constitutes slander, particularly when one cannot prove the allegations. A hint of satisfaction crossed the Reverend's face. He also mentioned that harassing a lady, regardless of her background, could result in legal consequences. Thompson won't be deterred by legal threats, Preston observed. Perhaps not, but there's more. It seems Madame Josephine at the Golden Lily was quite offended by Thompson's insinuations about her establishment. According to the sheriff, who received a telegram from Willow Creek this afternoon, she is threatened to reveal certain indiscretions of Thompson's own if he continues to speak about Miss Sullivan. Nora couldn't help the small, surprised laugh that escaped her. Josephine defended me? Self-interest, most likely, Preston murmured. Her business depends on discretion. Regardless of her motives, the result works in your favor, Reverend Miller said. Thompson has been unusually quiet since receiving this news. Hope flickered in Nora's chest. Perhaps staying wouldn't be impossible after all. What do you advise, Reverend? Preston asked. Patience and dignity. Continue as you have been. In time, this will blow over like most small-town scandals. The older man turned to Nora. And perhaps, Miss Sullivan, consider joining us for church services on Sunday. Nothing silences gossip faster than demonstrating your good character openly. After Reverend Miller departed, promising to return with his wife for dinner later in the week, Nora and Preston stood in the parlor, the Reverend's visit having shifted the ground beneath their feet once again. I had already decided to stay, Nora said quietly. Before he arrived, Preston's expression softened. You had. She nodded. I realized that running away would mean Thompson wins, that I'd be letting fear dictate my choices again, just as I did when I answered that advertisement for a companion position. Taking a deep breath, she continued, I don't want to live that way anymore. I want to stand my ground, to build something real here if you still want me to stay. The smile that spread across Preston's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. There's nothing I want more. The impulse to close the distance between them, to find out if his lips felt as warm as they looked, was nearly overwhelming. But Nora resisted, aware that such a step would complicate matters even further. Then I'll stay, she said instead, and we'll face whatever comes together. Preston nodded, respect and something deeper shining in his eyes. Together. True to the Reverend's prediction, Nora's appearance at church that Sunday caused a stir among the congregation. Whispers followed her down the aisle as she walked beside Preston and Mrs. Whitaker, heads turning to track their progress to a pew near the front. But there were also smiles, Martha Miller's warm welcome, Dr. Wilson's respectful nod, the schoolteacher's friendly wave. Not everyone had been swayed by Thompson's allegations. During the sermon, which focused pointedly on forgiveness and judgment, Nora felt Preston's hand find hers, his strong fingers interlacing with her own in a gesture of support and something more. She didn't pull away. After the service, several women approached Nora directly, among them the doctor's wife and the general store owner's daughter. "We're having a quilting circle on Tuesday afternoon," Mrs. Wilson said, her kind eyes meeting Nora's squarely. "We'd be honored if you'd join us." "I don't know much about quilting," Nora admitted. The store owner's daughter smiled. "Neither do I, but the refreshments and conversation make up for it. Please say you'll come." As they drove back to the ranch, Nora found herself laughing for the first time in days. "I believe I've just been officially accepted by the ladies of Pinecrest." Preston's answering smile was warm. They recognize quality when they see it. The following weeks brought a gradual shift in Nora's position within the community. The quilting circle led to an invitation to help with the school's harvest festival, which in turn led to the schoolteacher, Miss Collins, asking if Nora might consider assisting with lessons once a week. "I remember you mentioned you were a teacher's assistant in Denver," Miss Collins said. "We have so many children now, and only one of me. Even a few hours of help would be invaluable." Nora accepted with joy, finding in the schoolroom a sense of purpose she'd thought lost forever. The children, innocent of adult prejudices, accepted her readily, and their parents gradually followed suit as they saw the positive influence she had on their sons and daughters. At the ranch, her relationship with Preston evolved in subtle ways. Their evening conversations grew longer and more personal. Occasionally, his fingers would brush hers as he passed her the salt at dinner, or his hand would rest at the small of her back as he helped her into the buggy brief touches that sent warmth cascading through her. Yet neither spoke openly of their growing feelings, as though naming them might somehow break the fragile peace they'd established. It was Mrs. Whitaker who finally lost patience with their hesitation. One evening, after Preston had been called away to help a neighboring rancher with a difficult calving, the housekeeper fixed Nora with a penetrating stare across the dinner table. "You're in love with him," she stated flatly. Nora nearly choked on her tea. "Mrs. Whitaker." "Don't Mrs. Whitaker me, girl. I got eyes in my head. You love him, and he's just as smitten with you. What I can't understand is why neither of you has done anything about it." Heat flooded Nora's cheeks. "It's complicated. Only because you're making it so." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "Life's too short for such nonsense. My Henry and I had 42 years together, and it still wasn't enough. Don't waste the time you have dancing around each other like skittish colts. But what if the sky falls? What if the creek runs dry? What if he doesn't feel the same?" Mrs. Whitaker shook her head. "That last one's nonsense, as anyone with eyes can see. As for the rest, there are always what-ifs, always reasons to hesitate, but love's the one thing worth risking everything for." Nora studied the housekeeper's weathered face, seeing the wisdom of experience in her steady gaze. "I wouldn't know how to begin. Start by being honest with him and with yourself. The rest will follow." That night, Nora sat by her bedroom window long after the lamps had been extinguished, watching the moonlight silver the landscape and considering Mrs. Whitaker's words. Could it really be so simple? Just speak the truth and let the consequences come as they would? She was still awake when Preston returned, the sound of his horse in the yard drawing her to the window. She watched as he dismounted wearily, the long hours of assistance clearly having taken their toll. Without conscious decision, she found herself moving downstairs, a lamp in hand. Preston looked up in surprise when she opened the door, his exhausted features softening at the sight of her. "Nora, why are you still awake?" "I was worried," she admitted, stepping aside to let him enter. "Was the calving successful?" "Eventually. Mother and calf are both healthy, thank God." He removed his hat, running a hand through hair matted with sweat and dust. "I'm sorry if I concerned you." "You didn't. I just—" Nora hesitated, then continued softly, "I missed you." Something shifted in Preston's expression surprise, followed by a cautious hope. "Did you?" "Yes." She set the lamp down on the side table, gathering her courage. "Preston, I've been thinking about what you said weeks ago, about knowing what I was feeling." He went very still, his eyes never leaving her face. "And what conclusion have you reached?" "That I'm in love with you." The words emerged in a rush, as though afraid they'd never find voice if she hesitated. "That I have been almost since the beginning, though I tried to deny it. That I wake each morning grateful to be here. Not just for the safety or purpose you've given me, but because each day brings another chance to see you smile or hear you laugh or watch you with the horses." For one terrible moment, Preston didn't respond, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. Then he crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite tenderness. "Nora Sullivan," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the night I found you running from that dance hall, terrified but determined. I loved your courage then, and I've loved everything I've discovered about you since." Joy bloomed in Nora's chest, so intense it felt almost like pain. "Even knowing my past? Even after everything with Thompson?" "Especially then," Preston replied fiercely. "Your past shaped you but doesn't define you. You've proven that every day you've been here, facing down gossip with dignity, winning over the town through kindness and hard work." His thumbs brushed gently over her cheekbones, and Nora felt herself leaning into his touch, the last of her reservations melting away. "May I kiss you?" Preston asked, his eyes searching hers. In answer, Nora rose on tiptoe, closing the final distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a question and answer exchanged in the language of touch. When they parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I want to build a life with you, Nora," he whispered. "Not out of obligation or gratitude, but because I can't imagine my future without you in it." Tears stung Nora's eyes, but they were tears of happiness, not sorrow. "Nor I without you." Preston drew back slightly, his expression turning serious. "Then marry me. Be my partner in everything, this ranch, this life we've started building together." The proposal, simple and heartfelt, required no deliberation. "Yes," Nora answered, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I will marry you, Preston Hayes." His smile could have illuminated the darkest night as he pulled her close again, sealing their promise with a kiss that held all the passion they'd both been restraining for too long. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, Preston pressed his lips to her forehead. "Mrs. Whitaker will be insufferably smug about this development." "She deserves to be," Nora admitted. "She all but ordered me to confess my feelings tonight." Preston chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest where Nora rested against him. "She gave me the same lecture 2 days ago. Said if I didn't speak up soon, she'd lock us both in the root cellar until we sorted things out." The image made Nora laugh. "She's a formidable woman, who will make an excellent witness at our wedding," Preston added. "Assuming you don't want to wait too long?" Nora shook her head. "I've waited my whole life to find you. I don't want to wait much longer to be your wife." 3 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning, Nora Sullivan and Preston Hayes stood before Reverend Miller in the Pinecrest Church. The building was filled to capacity, not with the curious or judgmental, but with people who had come to genuinely care for the couple standing before them. Mrs. Whitaker sat in the front pew, her usually stern expression softened with something suspiciously like tears. Beside her sat Martha Miller, the doctor and his wife, Miss Collins from the school, and a dozen other friends who had welcomed Nora despite knowing fragments of her past. Even more surprising was the figure who slipped into the back of the church just as the ceremony began, Madame Josephine herself, dressed with uncharacteristic modesty in a dove-gray traveling suit. She met Nora's startled gaze with a slight nod, acknowledging the unexpected connection between them without disrupting the proceedings. As Nora spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, she felt the last shadows of the golden lily fall away. The woman who had fled that place in desperate fear now stood tall and proud, choosing her future with clear eyes and an open heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Miller declared, beaming at the couple before him. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Preston's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, drawing a cheer from those gathered to witness their union. As they turned to face their friends, Nora caught sight of Edward Thompson standing at the very back of the church, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly before he turned and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. "Are you all right?" Preston murmured, noting her momentary distraction. Nora squeezed his hand. "Never better." At the reception held at the Running H, with tables set up in the yard under strings of lanterns, Nora found herself sought out by an unexpected guest. "You clean up well, girl," Madame Josephine observed, sipping champagne as she surveyed the celebration. "Country life agrees with you." "What are you doing here, Josephine?" Nora asked, not unkindly. "Passing through on my way to San Francisco," the older woman replied with a shrug. "Thought I'd see how my investment turned out." At Nora's raised eyebrow, she elaborated, "Your husband paid a pretty penny for you. I wanted to see if you were worth it." "And am I?" Nora couldn't resist asking. Josephine's gaze shifted to where Preston stood talking with the Reverend, his face alight with happiness whenever his eyes found Nora across the yard. "He certainly thinks so, and that's all that matters, isn't it?" Before Nora could respond, Josephine pressed something into her hand, a small velvet pouch that clinked softly. "Consider it a wedding gift. Your earnings from the lily. I always set aside a portion for the girls, though most never stay long enough to collect." Surprise rendered Nora momentarily speechless. Thank you. Don't thank me. It was always yours." Josephine's painted lips curved in a rare, genuine smile. "Good luck, Nora Hayes. You've found something precious few ever do." As Josephine departed, Preston appeared at Nora's side, his arms sliding comfortably around her waist. "Was that Josephine I saw?" Nora nodded, still processing the unexpected encounter. "She brought a wedding gift of all things. Wonders never cease." Preston pressed a kiss to her temple. "Are you happy, Mrs. Hayes?" The name, her new name, freely chosen, filled Nora with warmth. "Completely." Late that night, after the guests had departed and the newlyweds had retired to the master bedroom, now their shared sanctuary, Nora stood by the window, gazing out at the land that had become her home. Preston's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting gently on her head. "What are you thinking?" he murmured. "About journeys," she replied softly. "How the worst day of my life led me to the best. How running from one thing brought me to something far greater than I ever imagined." Preston turned her in his arms, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I thank God every day that you ran from that dance hall, Nora Hayes, and that I was there to see you home." "Home," she echoed, the word holding all the meaning and promise she'd ever sought. "I love you, Preston. And I love you," he whispered, lowering his mouth to hers. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." As their lips met in the silver darkness, Nora knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found not just safety or shelter, but her true place in the world, in the arms of a man who saw her completely and loved her without reservation, on land that would nurture their future together, surrounded by a community that had learned to accept and embrace her. From the moment he had paid the madam and walked her into the night, their story had been writing itself in invisible ink, becoming clearer with each passing day. Now, as husband and wife, they would write the rest of it together, a love story born in desperate circumstances but destined to flourish under the vast Wyoming sky. as enduring as the mountains that watched over their home. Epilogue: 5 years later, the Running H Ranch had prospered beyond anyone's expectations. What had once been Preston Hayes' solitary domain was now a thriving family enterprise, its reputation for fine horses drawing buyers from as far away as Chicago and San Francisco. Nora sat on the wide front porch, a ledger open on her lap and a cup of coffee cooling at her elbow. From this vantage point, she could see Preston in the corral, working with their latest acquisition, a spirited Arabian stallion that would bring new bloodlines to their breeding program. Beside him stood their 4-year-old son, James, his small face serious as he watched his father's every move. The sound of childish laughter drew Nora's gaze to the garden, where Mrs. Whitaker supervised 2-year-old Catherine as she helped plant spring flowers, the little girl's dark curls bouncing with each enthusiastic pat she gave the soil. The peaceful scene was a far cry from the desperate night Nora had fled the Golden Lily, blood on her sleeve and terror in her heart. Sometimes it seemed like a distant dream, that other life, though she never allowed herself to forget it completely. Those experiences had shaped her, teaching her resilience and compassion that served her well as a wife, mother, and respected member of the community. The town of Pinecrest had grown almost as much as the Hayes family in the past 5 years. The railroad had brought prosperity and new settlers, including a lawyer who had recently approached Nora about establishing a proper school board, with her as its head. "You've transformed this community's approach to education," he told her. "The children are thriving under your guidance." It was true that Nora's work with the school had expanded from occasional assistance to a full partnership with Miss Collins. 3 days each week, she rode into town to teach, finding in education the purpose she'd always been meant for. Preston supported her completely, proud of the difference she was making in young lives. Edward Thompson had left the territory 2 years earlier, his property purchased by a family from Ohio who had proven to be far better neighbors. Occasionally, Nora heard rumors of his whereabouts: Denver, then Kansas City, always one step ahead of debts or trouble, but his shadow no longer darkened her happiness. Madame Josephine had indeed gone to San Francisco, using her considerable business acumen to open a hotel that, while respectable on the surface, catered to clientele who valued discretion. She wrote to Nora occasionally, her letters a curious mixture of worldly cynicism and genuine interest in the Hayes family's welfare. The wedding gift she'd given Nora, earnings from her brief time at the Golden Lily, had been invested in a trust for the children's education. It seemed fitting, somehow, that money earned in such circumstances would ultimately serve a higher purpose. "Mama, look!" James's excited voice pulled Nora from her reverie. The boy was sitting astride the corral fence now, pointing as Preston guided the Arabian through a complex series of maneuvers. "Papa says I can ride him when I'm bigger." "Much, much bigger," Preston called with a laugh, catching Nora's eye over their son's head. The look that passed between them still held all the warmth and love of their early days, deepened now by shared joys and challenges, by children born and a home built together. As the afternoon sun bathed the ranch in golden light, Nora closed her ledger and moved to join her family. Catherine spotted her first, breaking away from Mrs. Whitaker to toddle across the yard with arms outstretched. "Mama, flowers!" the little girl announced proudly as Nora scooped her up. "Beautiful flowers," Nora agreed, pressing a kiss to her daughter's dirt-smudged cheek. "Just like you." Preston emerged from the corral, leading James by the hand. Sweat glistened on his brow, and lines of experience had deepened around his eyes. But his smile when he looked at his wife and children remained unchanged, full of wonder and gratitude. "How's the bookkeeping?" he asked, leaning in to kiss Nora lightly. "Excellent. The quarter's profits exceed expectations." She shifted Catherine to her hip. "How's our new addition?" "Stubborn, intelligent, and worth every penny." Preston's hand settled comfortably at the small of her back. Rather like someone else I acquired in a business transaction years ago. Nora laughed, the memory no longer painful. I believe I've proven a sound investment. The best I ever made. His voice softened, meant for her ears alone. I love you, Nora Hayes. And I love you, she replied, the words as true now as when she'd first spoken them. As the family moved toward the house for supper, Nora glanced back at the road that led to Pinecrest and beyond to Willow Creek, to Denver, to the past she had survived. The journey had been difficult, marked by loss and fear, but it had led her here, to this moment of perfect contentment. She had tried to run from the dance hall, desperate for escape. Instead, she had found her way home, guided by the steadfast love of a man who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, not just a ranch or a family, but a life rich with purpose and joy. The sun dipped toward the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to treasure. But tonight, surrounded by those she loved most in the world, Nora Hayes knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, and she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had brought her here.